The file landed on my desk with a thud that felt heavier than its pages. Case 247. Plaintiff Eleanor Vance, 87. Defendant Robert Vance, 52. Her son. The complaint was short, brutal, and, unfortunately, all too common. A dispute over living arrangements. A disagreement about money. But I've been doing this long enough to read between the lines. The sanitized legal jargon was a flimsy curtain over a story of betrayal. The title of the story was already playing in my head. Honor thy mother unless it inconveniences you. I walked into the courtroom, the doors swinging shut behind me, the sound echoing a finality that the people waiting inside rarely appreciate. I settled into my chair, the leather sighing under my weight. I don't waste time with pleasantries. The taxpayers aren't paying me to ask about the weather. I looked at the plaintiff first, Eleanor Vance, 87 years old, but she held herself with the ramrod straight posture of a woman who had seen the Great Depression and wasn't impressed by much since. She was small, her hands folded neatly in her lap, but her eyes, when they met mine, were clear. There was hurt there, yes, but there was no weakness. Then my eyes moved to the defendant, Robert Vance, her son. He was sitting next to a woman I presumed was his wife, a sour-faced blonde who looked like she just smelled bad cheese. He had the soft, fleshy look of a man who'd never done a day of hard labor in his life. He was trying for a look of pained sincerity, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were shifty. They darted around the courtroom, looking everywhere but at his mother. Red flag number one. A man who can't look his own mother in the eye in a courtroom is a man with something to hide. All right, case 247, Vance versus Vance. I began, my voice cutting through the silence. Mrs. Vance, you are the plaintiff. You are suing your son, Robert Vance, for, let's see here. I picked up the paper, already knowing what it said. $5,000, the maximum in this court for costs related to what you claim was an illegal eviction and for the return of funds. I put the paper down. Simple enough. Sir, I said, locking my gaze on Robert. He visibly flinched. Your mother, the woman who gave you life, says you threw her out of your house. Is that true? Yes or no? He cleared his throat. Well, Your Honor, it's more complicated than that. It always is, I muttered, more to myself than to him. My internal monologue was already screaming. Complicated is the word people use when they mean I did it, but I have a stupid excuse. The question is simple, sir. Did she live in your house? And does she no longer live there because you and your wife told her to leave, yes or no? He squirmed. The wife nudged him. Yes, but. No buts, I snapped. We're not there yet. We're establishing the basic kindergarten level facts first. So she lived with you. Now, Mrs. Vance, I turned to her, my tone softening fractionally. Tell me about the arrangement. Why were you living with your son? The elderly woman's voice was surprisingly steady. My husband passed away 5 years ago. I sold our home. It was too big for me. Robert and his wife, Jennifer, she gestured with her head towards the sour-faced woman, suggested I come live with them. They were buying a new, larger house. They said there would be an in-law suite for me, a place to live out my years. And did you contribute to the purchase of this new, larger house? I asked. This was the heart of it. It always is. It's never about love. It's about money. Yes, Your Honor. I gave them $150,000 from the sale of my home for the down payment. The understanding was that I would have a home for the rest of my life, that my money was securing my future. I looked back at the son. His face was turning a blotchy red. $150,000, sir. Is that number accurate? It was a gift, Your Honor, he blurted out. The wife, Jennifer, nodded vigorously beside him, her bleached hair bouncing. She gifted us the money. She wanted to help us get our dream home. A gift, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a bad smell. I leaned forward. So let me get this straight. Your 82-year-old, recently widowed mother gives you her life savings, $150,000, as a gift. And just 5 years later, you kick her out on the street? Is that the kind of person you are? I didn't kick her out, he insisted. his voice rising. She was becoming difficult. She was forgetting things. She was getting argumentative. It wasn't a safe environment for her or for us. We suggested she might be more comfortable in an assisted living facility. Oh, you suggested it, I said, the sarcasm dripping. And how did you suggest it? With a Hallmark card and a box of chocolates? Or by packing her bags and changing the locks? Mrs. Vance, how did you find out you were no longer welcome in the home you paid for? Eleanor Vance looked directly at her son. For the first time, her voice trembled, but not with weakness, with fury. I came home from my weekly bridge game. My key didn't work. My belongings were in black garbage bags on the front porch. A note was taped to the door with the name of a state-funded nursing home. That was their suggestion. A collective gasp went through the courtroom gallery. I felt a cold knot of anger in my stomach. I've seen a lot of garbage in my career, but this was top tier. I stared at Robert Vance, the soft, fleshy man who put his mother's life in a trash bag. His pained, sincere expression had melted away, replaced by the sullen pout of a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Garbage bags, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You put your 87-year-old mother's possessions in garbage bags and left them on the porch. I let the silence stretch, forcing him and his wife to sit in the filth of their actions. Sir, we have a lot more to talk about. His shifty eyes were now glued to the floor. He knew, I think, that his day was about to get a whole lot worse. I was just getting started. I live for moments like this. The moment the mask of civility slips and you see the greedy, pathetic truth underneath, and I was about to rip it all the way off, I leaned back, letting my gaze drift from the son to the wife. Let's talk about these garbage bags, shall we? Ma'am, I addressed Jennifer, the sour-faced wife, directly for the first time. What's your name? Jennifer, she said, her voice thin and reedy. Jennifer, I repeated. Did you participate in this decluttering effort? Did your hands touch the garbage bags that held your mother-in-law's memories? She looked at her husband, a deer in headlights seeking guidance from another deer. We both did it. It was a joint decision. We were concerned for her. The concerned defense, I said, picking up a pencil and tapping it on my desk. A classic. You were so deeply concerned for her safety and well-being that you made her homeless. Does that logic track in your head, Jennifer? Because it's not tracking in mine. Out here in the real world, where actions have consequences, that's called cruelty. It's called elder abuse. Robert puffed up his chest, a pathetic attempt at defiance. That's not fair. We gave her a list of places. A list, I said flatly. You took $150,000 of her money, and in return, you gave her a list. Did you pay the deposit for one of these places? Did you drive her there? Did you even call to see if they had a bed available for an 87-year-old woman you just rendered homeless? Or did your concern end at the printer? Silence. The beautiful, damning silence of guilt. It's my favorite sound in this courtroom. That's what I thought, I continued, my voice like ice. So let's go back to this gift. A gift, by definition, has no strings attached. But this sounds an awful lot like it had a string, didn't it? The string was, give us your life savings and you can live here until you die. That's not a gift, sir. In the world of sane people, we call that an investment. We call that an agreement. A contract. There was no contract, he said, a little too quickly. Nothing was in writing. Oh, I'm sure there wasn't, I shot back. Because you're not stupid, just greedy. You knew that if you put it in writing, you'd be on the hook. You thought you could take advantage of your own mother, relying on the fact that she trusted you. She trusted her own flesh and blood not to swindle her. That was her mistake. Her mistake was thinking the son she raised had a conscience. I turned my attention back to the plaintiff. Mrs. Vance, during the 5 years you lived there, did you pay for anything else? Groceries? Utilities? I gave Robert $200 a week in cash from my Social Security. She said calmly, for food and bills. I didn't want to be a burden. I scribbled on my notepad, $200 a week. That's over $10,000 a year. For 5 years. That's another $50,000. My eyes went back to the defendant. He had the decency to look ashamed now, his face a mottled red. So let's tally this up, I said, my voice dangerously low. Your mother gives you a $150,000 down payment on your house. She then pays you roughly $52,000 over 5 years for the privilege of living in a room in the house she paid for. And after you've taken over $200,000 from this 87-year-old woman on a fixed income, your grand gesture of gratitude is to pack her life into hefty bags and change the locks. Do I have that about right? The wife, Jennifer, decided to speak up again. A terrible strategic error on her part. She was becoming impossible to live with. She would criticize my cooking. She would rearrange the decorative pillows. She said the music I listened to was just noise. I stared at her. I couldn't help it. The sheer, unadulterated pettiness of it was almost breathtaking. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting her absurd complaints echo in the room. Decorative pillows? I finally said, my voice deadpan, you made your husband's mother homeless because she fluffed your pillows wrong. I looked at Robert. You let this happen? You threw away your mother for a throw pillow? It was more than that, he protested weakly. It was the cumulative effect. The cumulative effect of what? Of having an elderly person in your home who didn't bow and scrape and thank you every 5 minutes for a roof she paid for in cash? You didn't want a mother. You wanted a tenant. A silent, grateful tenant who would subsidize your lifestyle. And when she acted like a human being with opinions and habits of her own, you got tired of the deal you made, the deal you profited from. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the bench, and looked directly at both of them. I was done with the questions. The picture was crystal clear. It was a simple, ugly photograph of greed and ingratitude. You two cooked up this plan together. Get the money, get the house, tolerate the old lady for a few years, and then, when it got inconvenient, toss her out. You thought she'd just go away quietly to some state-run facility and die. You miscalculated. You didn't realize that the woman who survived the Depression and raised a son like you had a spine of steel. I looked at Eleanor Vance. Her chin was up. Her eyes were clear. She wasn't crying. She was fighting. Mrs. Vance, I said, did you ask for your money back before you came to this court? Yes, she said. I called Robert. I asked him how I was supposed to live. I asked for just a portion of my money back so I could find a small apartment. He told me, and I quote, the gift is non-refundable. Then he hung up. Non-refundable, I repeated. The casual cruelty of that phrase hung in the air. I picked up my gavel. The defendants looked at me, a flicker of panic finally igniting in their dull eyes. They were starting to understand that their joint decision was about to have a joint price tag, and I was going to be the one to write the bill. I slammed the gavel down. Not to end the case, but to get their undivided attention. The crack echoed in the silent room. Non-refundable, I said, my voice low and seething, like she was a sweater you didn't like she was a piece of defective merchandise. This is the woman who changed your diapers, who stayed up with you when you were sick, who probably scraped together every penny she had to give you a decent life. And your final word to her is non-refundable? Is that the sum total of your gratitude? I locked my eyes on Robert Vance. He looked away. Coward! Look at me when I'm talking to you, I commanded. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with fear. You don't get to look away. You sat here and tried to paint your mother as some kind of doddering, difficult old woman to justify your disgusting behavior. But I see her. I see a woman who gave you everything, and you, in return, gave her the curb. My gaze shifted to the wife, Jennifer, the expert on decorative pillows. And you, I said, pointing a pen at her, you went along with this. This was your joint decision. Do you have a mother, Jennifer? She blinked. Yes, Your Honor. Is she alive? Does she ever rearrange your knickknacks? Does she ever say she doesn't like your new haircut? Do you have a supply of garbage bags ready for her, just in case she crosses the line one day? Of course not, she said, horrified. Then why? I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper. Is your mother's dignity worth more than his? What did this 87-year-old woman ever do to you to deserve being treated like trash? Other than finance the very house you now live in? She had no answer. Her lip quivered. The fake tan on her face couldn't hide the pale shock underneath. The pretty little fantasy she and her husband had built was crumbling under the harsh lights of reality. I turned back to the son. It was time to finish this. You are not the victim here, sir. You are a predator. You preyed on your mother's love and her loneliness after your father died. You saw a golden opportunity. You saw a walking, talking bank account. $150,000. Another $52,000 in cash. Over $200,000 you siphoned from her. And what did she get in return? A room. And then, not even that. You didn't just take her money. You took her security. You took her home. You took her family. All so you could have a bigger kitchen and a 2-car garage. I stood up. I rarely stand up. But this case, this one got to me. The sheer, unmitigated gall. You came in here with a story about a gift. Let me tell you what the law says about a situation like this. When one party is enriched at the expense of another under circumstances that the law sees as unjust, it's called unjust enrichment. There doesn't need to be a written contract when the intent is clear. The intent was that your mother would have a place to live for the rest of her life. You broke that promise. You took the money and ran. That's not just a moral failure, sir. That's a legal one. Her claim is for $5,000, I continued, walking a few steps from behind my bench. The maximum she can ask for in this court, it is a pittance. It is a fraction of what you stole from her. It won't give her back the years of security you promised, and it certainly won't give her back the son she thought she had. I stopped and looked directly at Eleanor Vance. Her eyes were locked on mine. In them, I saw a universe of hurt, but also an unbending strength. She had been betrayed by the one person she should have been able to count on, and yet she was here fighting for herself. Judgment for the plaintiff, I said, my voice ringing with finality. In the amount of $5,000, I walked back to my chair and sat down, picking up the gavel again. Robert and Jennifer slumped in their seats, one in defeat, the other in disbelief. They thought they could get away with it. They thought no contract was a magic wand. But we're not done, I said, holding their gaze. The money is the least of it. I want you to listen to me, Robert. He looked up, his face a mask of misery. You can pay this judgment. You'll grumble about it. Your wife will complain about it, but you'll pay it. But you can't pay back what you've truly taken. You had a mother. Today, you have a plaintiff. You had a home with family in it. Today, you have a house with a sour woman who's probably already wondering who's going to finance her next handbag now that the Bank of Mom is closed. I let that sink in. The wife shot him a venomous look. See, the foundations were already cracking. Greed is a poor adhesive for a relationship. You will leave this courtroom and go back to your beautiful house that she paid for. And one day you will be old, if you're lucky, and you will be alone. Because character, like karma, is a boomerang. And you just threw yours with all your might. I let my final words hang in the air, a sentence far heavier than the $5,000 judgment. This case is over. You may step down. For a moment, nobody moved. Robert Vance looked like a man who had just been punched in the gut. He opened his mouth, a pathetic but forming on his lips. Don't, I warned, my voice flat and final. Don't you dare say another word in my courtroom. You've said enough. You have revealed yourself for exactly what you are. There's nothing left to say. It was Jennifer who moved first. She stood up abruptly, the scraping of her chair, a shriek in the silent room. She didn't look at her husband. She didn't look at his mother. She looked at me, her face a mask of bitter resentment. As if I were the one who had wronged her. People like her, they can never see the mirror. They only see a world that is unfair to them. She turned and walked toward the exit without a backward glance at her husband. The joint decision had just become a solo retreat. Robert watched her go, his face a mess of confusion and panic. He looked like a lost little boy. A 52-year-old boy who had just sold his mother for a woman who was now abandoning him in the middle of a courtroom. It would almost be pitiful if it wasn't so deserved. He stumbled to his feet and scurried after her, a dog chasing its master. Then there was only Eleanor Vance. She stood slowly, with the careful, deliberate movements of her age. She smoothed down her dress, picked up her small handbag, and for the first time, she looked at the empty chair where her son had been sitting. I watched her face. I'm an expert in faces. I saw no tears. I saw no rage. I saw a quiet, profound, and utterly devastating finality. It was the look of a door closing for the last time, a chapter ending. She had not come here to get her son back. She had come here for validation, for the world to acknowledge that what was done to her was wrong. She turned and gave me a small, respectful nod. I nodded back. It was a moment of silent understanding between two women who know that sometimes you have to fight your own battles because the people who were supposed to be in your corner sold their tickets to the other side. As she walked out, the gallery was still silent. The air was thick with what had just happened. This wasn't just a dispute about money. It was a public dissection of a family's soul. And what we found inside was rotten. I sat back in my chair, the file for Vance versus Vance still open before me. The bailiff, Bird, knew not to interrupt me in these moments. I looked at the names: Eleanor, Robert, a mother and a son. The most fundamental human connection, twisted into this ugly knot of greed and convenience. People watch this show and they're entertained. They laugh at the foolishness, they gasp at the drama, but they don't see what I see. I see a parade of broken things, broken promises, broken trust, broken families. I see people who will lie, cheat, and steal for a few $100s, for a used car, for a security deposit, on a flea-bitten apartment. And today, I saw a son who sold his mother's remaining years for a quiet life with a shrew who cared more about decorative pillows than human decency. The shock people feel isn't about the legal ruling. The law is simple. The shock comes from seeing the ugliness that lurks just beneath the surface of a family Christmas card. The shock is the realization that honor thy mother and father isn't a suggestion, it's a commandment, because human beings, left to their own devices, are capable of profound selfishness. I thought about Robert. In a few years, Jennifer would likely be gone. She'd find another man with a bigger house, perhaps one without any inconvenient elderly mothers in the picture. And Robert would be alone in that big, beautiful house his mother paid for. The silence he so desperately wanted, he would get, and it would be deafening. He would be haunted by the memory of garbage bags on a porch. He'd see his mother's face, not as she was, but as she looked at him in this courtroom. A stranger to whom he owed $5,000. I closed the file. The story was over. The legal part, anyway. The human part would drag on for the rest of their miserable lives. Bird caught my eye. Next case, Judge? I took a deep breath. Bring them in, Bird, I said, my voice returning to its normal, brisk cadence. The day is young, and I'm sure there's a whole new batch of nonsense waiting for us. The doors opened, and two new people walked in, arguing already. I sighed internally. Just another day at the office. But the image of Eleanor Vance walking out of my courtroom, alone but with her dignity intact, would stick with me for a long time. She lost a son, but she won the war. And sometimes that's the only victory you get. I walked back to my chambers, the black robe feeling heavier than usual. I hung it up and loosened my collar. The adrenaline from the courtroom confrontation was beginning to fade, leaving behind a familiar, metallic taste of disappointment in humanity. I get paid to fix stupid, but some kinds of stupid you can't fix. Malice isn't stupid, it's a choice. And Robert Vance and his pillow-fluffing wife had chosen to be malicious. Bird came in with a cup of tea, the way I like it. Strong, hot, no nonsense. He set it on my desk. He's a man of few words, which is one of the reasons I've kept him around for so long. He's seen more human wreckage than an ER doctor. That was a rough one, Judge, he said, his voice a low rumble. They're all rough, Bird, I replied, taking a sip of the tea. It scalded my tongue. Good. This one was just blatant. The sheer, unadorned greed. It's like they didn't even bother to dress it up in a cheap suit. The garbage bags, he said, shaking his head slowly. That's the part that gets you. That's the part that tells you everything you need to know, I agreed. It wasn't enough to evict her. They had to humiliate her. They had to turn her life's possessions into trash. It was a symbolic act. They were throwing her away. Because she was no longer shiny and new and useful to them, I looked out the window at the bustling New York street below. Thousands of people, all with their own stories, their own mothers. You know, people complain about the younger generation. Entitled, lazy. But this guy was 52. He's from my generation. There's no excuse. Some people are just born without a spine. The case stuck with me for a few days. A burr under the saddle, before being buried by the next avalanche of idiocy. Cheating lovers, lying tenants, neighbors fighting over a fence that's 2 inches over the property line, the usual circus. Then, about 3 months later, after the episode had aired, one of my producers, a bright young woman named Sarah, knocked on my door. Judge, do you have a minute? It's about a past case, Vance versus Vance. I waved her in. Don't tell me he didn't pay. I'll send Bird over to his pretty little house to collect it in person. Oh, he paid, Judge. He paid the day after the judgment, she said, holding a tablet. That's not it. The episode aired 2 weeks ago. And, well, it sort of blew up. The internet, people were very invested. Invested in what? The wife's pillow collection? I asked dryly. In Eleanor. And in them. Sarah's face was a mixture of professional detachment and genuine fascination. We got a lot of feedback. Viewers started doing their own digging. They found out where Robert and Jennifer lived. I leaned back in my chair. Uh-oh, I smell trouble. Don't tell me people are sending them garbage bags. Worse, she said, a small smile playing on her lips. Pillows. Hundreds of them. The local news even did a story. Their front lawn was covered in decorative pillows of every shape and size. Someone even left a huge banner on their fence that just said, non-refundable. I couldn't help it. A short, sharp bark of a laugh escaped me. You're kidding me. Not at all. And that's not the half of it. Robert Vance is an accountant in a mid-sized local firm. His boss saw the show. His clients saw the show. Apparently, people aren't too keen on trusting their life savings to a man who swindled his own mother out of hers. He was fired last week. I grunted, though I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Cause and effect. It's the most beautiful law in the universe. And the wife? What's her name, Jennifer? She deleted all her social media. A community Facebook page identified her as a board member on a local charity for, get this, family and elder support. Of course, I said, rolling my eyes. The hypocrisy of some people is truly an art form. She was asked to resign in a very public way. Sarah finished. They're selling the house. Apparently, they've become the town pariahs. They can't go to the grocery store without people muttering garbage bags at them. It was a satisfying slice of justice, served up not by the court, but by the community. They had committed their crime in the dark, and I had simply provided the spotlight. The public did the rest. Good, I said simply. They made their bed of decorative pillows. Let them lie in it. But Judge, Sarah said, leaning forward slightly, her voice dropping, that's not the real story. That's not the part that shocked everyone. I raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. It's about Eleanor Vance, she said. What she did with the $5,000 and with the attention from the show. My interest was piqued. I had pictured her finding a small, quiet apartment, living out her days in peace. I had underestimated her, just as her son had. Sarah swiped the screen on her tablet and turned it to face me. The headline read, 87-year-old plaintiff uses court winnings to launch foundation for elderly victims of family fraud. I stared at the picture. It was Eleanor Vance, standing in front of a small office building. She wasn't smiling, not exactly. Her expression was one of fierce, unyielding determination. The woman who was supposed to fade away had decided to start a war, and I had just handed her the ammunition. I took the tablet from Sarah and read the article. It wasn't a long piece, but it was potent. Eleanor Vance hadn't just cashed the check, she had leveraged it. The story of her case, amplified by the television broadcast, had become a rallying cry. Other seniors, people who had been swindled by their own children, their own relatives, started reaching out to her. The local news story about the pillow protest had given her a platform. She used it. The article quoted her. "I thought I was alone," she said. "But my story, it turns out, is the story of thousands of people who are too ashamed or too frightened to speak up. They give their life savings for a promise of care, a promise of family, and they get a locked door in return. My son called me non-refundable. Well, I am making sure that the dignity of our elderly is non-negotiable." She had used the $5,000 from the judgment as seed money. A local lawyer, moved by her story on the show, offered to do the legal work pro bono to establish the Eleanor Foundation. Its mission was simple: to provide legal aid and temporary housing resources for seniors who had been financially exploited and displaced by their own families. She had turned her personal humiliation into a public crusade. I handed the tablet back to Sarah. I was silent for a moment. In my long career, I have handed down tens of thousands of judgments. They are transactions, a solution to a problem. Money changes hands. Property is returned. The case is closed, and I move on. It is rare, exceptionally rare, that I get to see the ripple effect. To see a judgment become not just an end, but a beginning. "Well, I'll be damned," I said softly. My internal monologue was humming. This woman, this 87-year-old plaintiff, had more grit and strategic brilliance than a five-star general. Her son and his wife had tried to render her invisible, to reduce her to a set of problems to be managed and eventually discarded. They thought her story would end in a quiet, lonely room in a state-funded facility. They had misjudged their opponent completely. She didn't just fight back, she built a fortress, and now she was inviting others inside. The story said the ruling shocked everyone. I mused out loud, looking at Sarah. They got it wrong. The ruling didn't shock anyone. It's a simple case of unjust enrichment. Anyone with half a brain could see it. I tapped the tablet. This is what's shocking. An 87-year-old woman, after being publicly betrayed by her only child, decides not to retreat into bitterness, but to build an army. That's the shock. The shock isn't that people can be cruel. I see that every day. The shock is that people can be so incredibly resilient that out of the ugliest betrayals can rise the most profound strength. The story of Vance versus Vance was no longer about a pathetic, greedy son and his vapid wife. Their part in the drama was over. They had been relegated to a footnote, a cautionary tale about what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. They were the catalyst, nothing more. The real story, the one that would endure, was about Eleanor. I thought about the legacy we leave. Robert's legacy would be a lawn full of pillows and a story of shame that would follow him for the rest of his life. Eleanor's legacy would be a foundation. It would be in the lives of the people she would help, the seniors who would find a voice because she used hers. She had turned the worst moment of her life into her defining one. I stood up and walked to the window. The city bustled below, a complex machine of millions of lives intersecting, colliding, and separating. In one of those buildings was a woman who had come to my courtroom seeking justice for a broken promise. She had walked out with a small check and a large righteous fire. She had reminded me of something I occasionally forget in the daily deluge of human folly. The law can punish the wicked, but it cannot create heroes. People have to do that for themselves. "Sarah," I said, turning from the window, "do we have a contact number for the Eleanor Foundation?" "We do, Judge," she said, surprised. "Get them on the phone," I said. "Tell them Judge Judy is on the line, and tell them I'd like to make a donation." a non-refundable one. I sat back down at my desk. The day was still young. There was a new case waiting, a new story of foolishness about to unfold. But for the first time in a long time, the weight of it all felt a little bit lighter. Because today, justice wasn't just a verdict. It was a beginning. Eleanor Vance had taken a simple $5,000 judgment and turned it into a weapon for good. Her son had kicked her out, but in doing so, he had unleashed a force he could never have comprehended. And that, I thought, with a grim smile, was the best ruling of all.
पंद्रह सेकंड ही कर ले।
हाँ आधा घंटा की जी 5-10 मिनट चल अंदर बाबू बोलो या ना बोलो गेहूं दिखाओ तुम बस बात खत्म 10 मिनट की बना ले गेहूं दिखाओ ये तो हम मन पे आते गुजरात तो हम जख में ये इंग्लैंड मेरे मैसेज का आया तो मैं जीमेल खोल के नहीं देखी मैं कि मैसेज का आया रे फिर मैं गई यूट्यूब में गई मैंने कही देख वीडियो तो नहीं डाली है निकलन की वीडियो हमने कही एक दिन फोन लो तो सनिया ने कही थी लिया तेरे वीडियो डाल दे तेरे चैनल बना दे देखें ये माँ तो चल मेरी आंखें फट गई जो देख के मैं अंतला भेजो नहीं भानु मामा तो दे दे ठीक है अच्छा भाई भानु वो वीडियो बना के भानु हां अच्छा मतलब लल्ला जो तुम आओ हमने कहा हां आई है क्या जगन और आंदे मैं तब देखे आए तुम का देखो का
वीडियो क्वालिटी साफ नहीं आ रही।
डब्बी कर दी मैंने बहुत कम कर दी काय से बना रहा ओपन कैमरा से बना रहा
भाई तो जो तुम
ठीक है बस पर कर दे खत्म बाकी तो मैं बना ले याद आ गया बस हम बे ऑर्डर ही दारू दकड़ा वाली ऑर्डर ही लौड़ा डांस पार्टी कर रहे हैं पे वो लगा दो गुजरात वाली करी
गुजरात चलो बोला मेरे
दुनिया की दारू के बाद इतनी महंगी दारू है इंग्लैंड तब आदमी पी रहा हूं मैं
अरे 1 मिनट अब भाई बड़ा देर में रिकॉर्ड हो दे
नवा का लग रहा हूं
हैं
नवा का लग रहा अरे चक्का पे भी अरे खाने में तो है खाने मिला भाई
जीवन जीबी को है जा वो थोड़ी
तेरे मुंह 25 MB ज्यादा नहीं बनी
अच्छा
हां देखिए अच्छा
31.3 GB करी तूने कितनी है जा
ये बिहार वाले हमारे में
पागल जी अपने बूढ़ा रहे तो है जा है
देखे तेरे कितने चले गए हैं ना हम देख रहे तूने देख कर फिर ना है देखा होगा फिर आ नहीं देखाइए तू बड़ा के 4 व्यूज गए हुए क्या नहीं लला आज रात में चले देखी मेरी खुद रात में चलती अरे इंग्लैंड एक लोगों ने काम हो जाए सब इंग्लैंड करो अपने अपने हिसाब से बेचारी भाई भाई देख तूने कर दे सोई होगी नहीं मैंने नहीं करे मैं क्या करे पागल है ये तो तेरे अपने आप जा रहे ना जो ही बता रहा हूँ सनी भैया हम वहाँ पे थे अगर तो वीडियो हम कर दिए हम तो वीडियो कॉल दिखाए तू वैसे वैसे करती रहिए हमने जगह थी घर आए तब कर लिए तुम अपने थे ब्याह होने जा रहा लेकिन सुधरे नहीं टांगे फटे हैं दोनों जल्दी ब्याह हुए हैं दोनों
ये दोनों मत क्या देखो रिकॉर्डिंग कर लियो कर फ्री फायर हो बड़ी करो वीडियो
रिकॉर्ड डालते नहीं लोग 10 मिनट यार खेला जी यार जिंदगी हमने तो क्या देखो रिकॉर्ड कर देंगे अरे जे छोड़ो यार मेरे एक सारो ओवर करा भाई इतने कहते ओडी एक 2 घंटा फ्री फायर खेलता रहा बैठो कहने इसकी रिकॉर्डिंग भेजते करिए यार आ जाइए खिलाफ ले लो खिलाफ निकाल ले डाउनलोड वाली
अपनी प्लम्बिंग की बना खा दो करें
दूसरे निकाल डाल रहे हो या मॉनिटर है लिख के क्या लिख के आ गया हाँ रीयूज कंटेंट अच्छा यूज करो बोट लगी
अपनी 4 मिनट की वीडियो बनते हैं 4 मिनट भाई ज़्यादा होगा लाइट कम कर ले
और बड़ा कम कर ले कोई भी दिक्कत नहीं मेरा जल्दी चैनल मॉनिटर बोला
नौ काय बनाओ
लगाओ
उड़ेगा कितना उड़ाए तो
देने लगा
कॉपीराइट कर दो
कॉपीराइट है तो जी स्ट्राइक मार दी भी चलेगा तो कितने 10,000
अच्छा वो दिखा रहे हो
तो दे दे तो मेरे
हम नहीं डाले हम जी डाले जी नाच वाले दैया दैया
रो डारो
दिनचक दैया वाले
हम बैठे हैं
पागल है 8 वीडियो हैं
अच्छा ले चले कोल के भैया नहीं कौन पी लिया हमने पी भाई भगवान का बड़ी गलत बात है
छपटोगी
हमने झपटी नहीं हम तो आराम से पकड़ा हुए थे ले ले चले भैया
चलो इसे अभी ये मोनेटाइज कराओ चैनल इसको अभी
अभी मोनेटाइज करा
अभी
ये रखता हूं
मैं ले सामान ट्रैक्टर एक्टर तूने ही बनाया है
और का मेरा बहुत यूज था ले ले यार चले
अब तार के आओ
भैया यार
और
मतलब सुनाओ ये भी अरे यार बचा ना बूढ़े वाले आदमी दिखाएंगे मेरे हमें तो भैया
तो है
बिस्किट लिया है बिस्किट मैंने और जल्दी लोग काप रहे हैं देखो अच्छा थोड़ी सी तुमको लगाना बोल रहे हैं बस दे ये हम क्या कौन जा रहा है तुम एक घूम रहा हो पहले तुमने कही तुमने बर्बाद दे भाई आज तुम यहाँ दवाई ऐसी मरना दुनिया ज्यादा बात चलिए
सही है कैसे सही है
लाजवाब मत पकड़ बस हाँ जी निकाल ले आलू के सही बात स्वागलें खबर है ट्रैक्टर पे मीट हुआ है बोलू मम्मी अच्छा
नरमे जी में वीडियो निकाल ले ठंडा ठंडा लिए हम ले ले
वो तो छड़ा तो लाई तूने
हाँ छड़ा ली जन्नत ना दई एक घूंट जगह दे घूंट भी हम ठीक भाई मैंने जूठी कर दिया
पूरी ठंडा झूठी आधा ही डर गई पीगो मेरे निकल ले
आज नहीं बीस वाली है
पूछे वाली आती
सब 20 रुपए दीजिए
कहाँ ठंडा गंजा रो ले आन दे हमें
दे दे
रुके नहीं
चल
यार
यार
बस कंजूसी चल रही तुम जान तो
नहीं हम पे नहीं कंजूसी
संडे संडे तो
हमारा तो खर्चे हो गए
काम पे चलो करेंगे
मेरा तो खर्चा हो गया
का खर्चा ही कहाँ होते खर्चा ही चर्चा होते है सबको वो करावला लड़का वो सही कहा खर्चा हुआ तो चर्चा ही हुई है ससुराल लोग घर पहुंच गई वो बहुत बड़ा हो गया बहुत बड़ा हो गया करिया पर बिल्कुल ठोर करिया
सूख जाए
सर्जरी है अब है नहीं 25-30 साल बाद है 20-25 साल बाद सर्जरी है चढ़ जाए करिया खा ले
अरे वो बांध दे जाके वो बाहर बांधो जाता का दिक्कत है
वो कहाँ है बड़े आइए नहीं आती उनकी सर्जरी नहीं देगा तो करिया दुकानदार के अब उन्होंने सर्जरी कराई है कुल रुपये खर्चे और माल नहीं है ही नहीं उनके गाय वही है करी आते उनके सर्जरी हो
मुझे कट के फिर कहीं से बॉडी के उठा के खाल धरी जाएगी अच्छे से।
लगे 2-3 लाख रुपये
नहीं इतनी मालूम नहीं। हाँ वो तो लग गया।
तो लगेगा, इतनी बड़ी सर्जरी नहीं है ना, सर्जरी इतनी बड़ी नहीं है। गटू खाऊंगा ही घर लौटी वापस, अबे आके फिर लौटी पसंद जन फोन ही नहीं उठा, बताओ नहीं क्या रिएक्शन।
गोविंदा के हाँ मैं तब बताइए डॉक्टर मैं तब
काय काम किन्ने की बात कर रहे हैं?
गोविंदा चाउमीन खाया है, गोविंदा बूंदी खाया है हम लोग। लौट के देख रहे हो, बता देख रहे कैसे चीज है कहाँ तो लौट के गौरव अंतर आए थे जो हम लोग तो बैठे एक बार चले देखें नीले में आई थी और भगवान भी यहाँ और जो कहाँ थे बने आए थे तो लौट हम चल दी हम नहीं पा रहे